Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Blindspot, a great season premiere. It was so good because it's just everything that went down in the episode, but plus, like, on top of all of that, there were a lot of surprises in this episode I wasn't expecting. So let me kind of break down a little bit of what I'm talking about. Like, for example, like the whole, like, we're time skipping a little bit. Like, I was kind of thinking we'd probably pop up like immediately after season three's finale. It's like, no, it's been a little time. Kurt's a little bit better. Turns out the whole being in a coma thing was only for a week. Because we don't get that adjustment period of like Remy. Because from now on, she's not Jane, she's Remy. I'm going to refer to her as Remy from now on. But Remy, like, we don't get none of those early days of her trying to pretend like she remembers everything, you know? Because like her memory stops from when she goes under. You know, it's so kind of interesting because it's kind of like, in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of messed up and funny because like she has to pretend to be Jane and Jane's in love with Kurt. The man that she was in love with the last time she checked was Oscar, and now it's like, oh yeah, Oscar, the man that you killed yourself. And it's just kind of like, ugh, it's kind of, I don't even think I thought about that last season, but now it just kind of put it in my head. It's like, oh man, that makes that situation even more twisted in that regard, because it's like, yeah, no one actually killed Oscar. It was ultimately her that did it, and that was just kind of interesting to me. But the fact of the matter is, you know, kind of bringing up a few interesting things, like obviously the whole situation at the beginning. Interesting enough, Aiko is played by, it could be Ryla or Rila. I'm going to say Ryla Fukushima, which a few things I recognize her from is the Wolverine movie. She was in that, and she was also Katana in the TV show Arrow. That was kind of roughly around that was season 3. I think she subsequently popped up at least once after season 3, but it could be me misremembering things. But I love the fact is that they have this whole plan and everything, and it kind of gets blown up in their faces because Rich and her have a game of Go, and it's the whole back and forth. Because it turns out she already knew who Rich was from the very beginning, even spelling out RDCRich.com on the boards. I thought that was kind of interesting because she was planning on selling him and everything, and trying to be like, no, that ain't me. This is this and that. So it's just kind of interesting because it all was about one of the caches that Roman had hidden away. Like I said, brain it. Is this the first time, like, side note, is this the first time Jane's ever fought with a sword? I feel like I don't remember her ever doing that before. I mean, like, as I saw, like, a promotional picture for, like, that very scene, I was like, oh, look at her holding a sword, that's so badass. So I like that she kind of full-on fought, and even fought Aiko. Even Rich trying to help partway through the fight, he picks up a sword and it kind of gets knocked down a little bit. He's like, okay, never mind. He puts the sword down and just backs away and lets Jane do her thing. And there was a whole thing of about color by Rooney. Aiko was kind of like, oh, put an end to me. And then Rich is like, oh, we're the FBI. We don't do that. And she's about to get her, and then Jane just stabs her. Remy stabs her, and Rich is kind of like, oh, I guess we do just execute people sometimes. So there's that. They ended up getting the cash. Then on top of that, there's basically, we end up finding out kind of another thing about the whole time skip thing. This is their fourth one of Roman's caches that they've gotten. Granted, he still has 8 more. But also the problem is that they ended up learning some things they weren't. The team ends up learning is that the zip that's in Jane's system, it's not just going to have the effects that it had on Roman, not just the headaches and hallucinations. Eventually, it will kill her because basically it'll make its way up to her brainstem. And it's kind of interesting in a very messed up way. Essentially, what Zip is doing to her memory is going to basically do to her body functions. Eventually, her brain is going to literally forget how to do normal things, such as breathing. And that's how it ultimately will kill her. I'm like, that's so messed up and brutal. Because they never actually knew about Roman's condition until, like, you know, now. Because, like, they're like, oh, they're only assuming because they didn't know. But that's why Roman was probably handling the situation himself, because it's like he was trying to find a potential cure for it because he knew what was wrong with him. And I even love them, Remy being like, no, my Roman and Shepard wouldn't put that in my system if they knew it was bad. It's like, well, maybe at the time they didn't know. I mean, to be fair, who knows? I think she's kind of giving Shepard a little more credit. Roman probably would. I mean, interestingly enough, it was Jane who, I mean, ultimately this was all her plan. Remember, Oscar said that, like, back in season 1. But to be fair, like, I wouldn't put it past Shepard to be like, oh yeah, I knew the risk, but I put it in your system anyway because we believed in his cause and everything, which would be interesting if that ends up being the case, because that'd probably add even more animosity towards the whole, like, that would probably add a layer of animosity between Remy and Shepard. But then maybe for her, it's like, no, I understand you did what you needed to do. But the fact is she was defensive like that was kind of like, no, my family would never do that to me. It's like, Shepard wouldn't. I wouldn't be too surprised if Shepard did. Roman, I would never do that. Maybe Roman later on would, but nevertheless. What's also interesting too, it's just kind of a little bit of a nerdy thing. It's just this little quick conversation where it's kind of like, because basically Remy has been reaching out to Sandstorm, and they basically end up kind of figuring this out because basically someone finally responded to her, and then, no. It wasn't that conversation. It was a different conversation. It was about the whole, like, taking down Crawford's corporation, because it's like, even with him going, a lot of the foundation has been laid out so that, it could still be kind of doing its own thing, that it was doing. So then it becomes a situation of, like, we got to take care of that group, but then, like, you have Rich not wanting to do it. I'm assuming because it's like, you're literally going up against a supervillain organization, kind of world domination type. So it's kind of like, I'd rather not deal with that. I'd rather deal with the caches. But Patterson says in a line of like, it's like a Hydra. You cut off one head and no one goes back. That's interesting on many different levels, because Ashley Johnson, I recently found this out because I did a whole thing of rewatching MCU movies, pops up in Avengers, the first Avengers movie, and it's interesting because Jamie Alexander is a part of the MCU because she played Lady Sif in the Thor movies. And the reason why I'm tying that all together, because she said Hydra. Yes, she was referencing like the Greek mythology Hydra, but at the same time, that's where that all kind of stems from too. It's a whole thing, which is funny considering the fact is in Marvel, it's more like an octopus symbol. That's the Hydra thing. But then a lot of mythology tends to make Hydras dragon-like serpents. But I guess maybe it never meant. That's me being nitpicky and stuff like that. It's just kind of interesting to me. Like I said, I know she meant the more mythological thing, but still, I just thought it was kind of interesting. Another interesting thing I'm curious about too, they kind of like handle it in this episode, but I'm curious to see what that means going for the future. And that was something I was bringing up. What about Avery? Because it seems like she's away at college for now. So it's like, how did you handle that? Like, being Remy, it's like, this is still your daughter. Like, I'm curious, are they going to really, like, is she going to even play a part in this? Because, like, revenge kind of been settled, like Crawford's dad. So she kind of got her revenge for her dad is there, well, her dad and her family, but in more particular her dad. So that's kind of settled for her. So maybe that's why they'll probably to be kind of a background thing. But I'll be so interested to see, because remember, Remy had that child when she was Remy. She had Avery when she was Remy. So I'm curious, like, how that really felt coming back to be like, well, my daughter's, so, I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it in the long run. I mean, just how much of Remy's life got turned upside down, because once again, the last thing she remembered was the zip being put in her system. And now she's like, boom, I'm here all this time later. And it's like, what the hell? Everything's going to shit, So there's that level of thing. She has to pretend like she's in love with Kurt when it's just, she hates him. Turns out she's starting to see Roman as a part of a hallucination, which I'm kind of excited about, because it's like, hey, the fact of the matter is that just means we're going to get more Luke Mitchell, which is like pretty awesome. But I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic, because she's kind of on her own in this whole crusade of trying to get revenge, because she ends up meeting with Dolan, what do I recognize that actor from? I think Mike and Molly, because I was trying to remember. I was like, I knew it was a sitcom I remember that actor from, but he was like, he was one of the main characters in, main/recurring characters in the sitcom Mike and Molly. I just thought that was kind of interesting, but his name was Dolan, and it turns out like, they figured out his identity and stuff like that. I was thinking like, the moment they start bringing up cell phone stuff, I'm like, I hope Remy didn't have her cell phone on her at the time, which she kind of didn't. But it's all up. She ends up helping him and stuff like that, because like I said, once again, it's interesting because she's so pissed at everyone. In particular, she's pissed at Kurt. It's like, you're the one that helped literally bring this organization down. It wasn't really Kurt's influence, like you as Jane. Like, it's kind of interesting. It's that whole nature versus nurture thing of like, who are you without, your memories? Like, without her experiences as Remy, kind of shows you what kind of person it is. And that's kind of an interesting thing to see the path that Remy goes down, and you see for yourself, like, who she was as Jane, and you compared it to, as like, they are two very different people. Jane wouldn't have done what she did against, Aiko, because that's just not how she operates. And like I said, you just see the like difference in how they handle that situation. So it's just kind of ironic and funny that she hates him so much, considering the fact is that she's the one that kind of was kind of like the nail in the coffin for Sandstorm. So it's just kind of interesting. And so I also thought was kind of interesting is she activates one of her old tattoos, which is like, oh yeah, because obviously you don't have the insight into the other tattoos, which does beg the question, what about the other like tattoos that Jane has, like the tattoos Roman made? Like, I mean, I'm assuming that Cash must have some of those ciphers or something for the rest of those tattoos. So there's that. That was mainly about the whole Crawford situation. So beyond that, I don't know, like, what will really happen. I mean, he deleted a lot of stuff, or at least try to flood their system with a lot of stuff to try and cover up like a lot of stuff to prevent them from unlocking a lot of the tattoos, even though we're coming close. So there's that. But there's also the interesting aspect of like the fact that she can activate her tattoos, because it's like, well, obviously she knows the entire plan. So obviously any tattoos that are left over, which Reed was kind of like, oh yeah, like we solved most of them. There's some that have kind of run dry, which is an interesting thing because it's still like, oh yeah, those tattoos can still be activating in point in time. Same thing for Romans, like they just need the cipher for them, and just know specifically what needs to happen to activate the tattoos and stuff like that. So Jane ended up activating one so they could go to this, was it the JA? Like it's basically a criminal underground organization, and so that they can so that she could get money from the vault, so she could pay for mercenaries basically rebuilding Sandstorm. Long of it all, like, hey, try to interfere with Reed getting Dawson later on, and it's like, nope, Reed still gets it anyway. And it's just kind of like, yep, now Jane's back to being on her own. Granted, she has Roman, so like I said, that's just an interesting dynamic, because it's like she's slowly dying, plus she's not Jane anymore, she's Remy, and she's actively trying to stop the FBI, but she's also working with them because it's like they are her only means to an end. Like they are her only means of getting a cure, so she has to work with them. It's also interesting because it's like, oh, you blame them for that. It's like, the fact of the matter is the FBI was actually kind of working with Roman when you wiped his memories, because because the question then becomes like, how much does Remy know about what she did as Jane? So it's like, oh yeah, like what's happened to you? You zipped your brother. Oh, which is actually messed up. I don't even know if I thought about that last season. Maybe I did. It's like, oh yeah, you're the reason why Roman died. I mean, you were leading him down to death because you zipped him. It was kind of your fault. In retrospect, it's kind of like, oh yeah, you kind of did this to your own brother. You probably don't even remember that you did it. So you kind of did all that to him. Granted, it wasn't him. It wasn't the FBI that ultimately killed him. It was Blake. But the point I was trying to make is like the FBI was trying to welcome him in. Like even Kurt was willing to give him a chance. Like things were different, like that was kind of the same conversation of nature versus nurture, because like with Roman, like he was kind of a good person, but he had his demons because there were still things kind of broken in him that were just kind of beneath the surface that couldn't have been completely reversed because of the whole Zip situation. So nevertheless, okay. So continuing to break stuff down, let's talk about the fact is the whole Blake situation. And for one, it's like Tasha's there and Tasha's trying to get Blake to run her dad's company. And there's a few recognizable actors. I'm blanking on her name. It's literally one of the first names that popped up, like special guest star. I was wondering if that was her name because I always confuse her with a different actress. It's just the whole thing. But like obviously, like she played Nick's mom on the TV show Graham. There's also one of the she plays Madeline, but there's another actress that was there. I'm blanking on her name. She was like the first one to kind of drop dead. Isn't that the actress who played Cora's mom on the season 1 of The Sinner? I think it's the same actress. I could be 100% wrong. Nevertheless, I did not see that coming at first, because for one, it's like, oh yeah, like you did all this stuff with Blake, and it's like, and Blake is dead. What? No way. I did not expect that at all. I was like, that's crazy. I guess you can call it kind of poetic justice and irony, considering the fact is that she's the one that killed Roman, actually. That's kind of sad and messed up. It's like, holy crap. Because in all honesty, she, it's kind of like, oh, you're a child at this, like, because I guess it seems like Madeline's got her own motives for doing what she's doing. Like maybe she was always waiting for an opportunity to go after Crawford, but Crawford was always, too paranoid, too close to the vest when it came to a lot of things, but she knew Blake would be like, oh, she's an amateur at this, I can take her out, and took her out. It's like, I just wasn't expecting that. I was like, oh my god, Blake. Yeah, she kind of feel a little bad for her, but at the same time it's kind of like, I don't know, I did not see them doing that to her. And then Tasha, Apparently, Madeline knows all she knows about Tasha. Granted, she doesn't know about the whole CIA thing, so that was kind of interesting because there was a whole conversation about like, oh, who's going to take over, Crawford's organization and say, okay, Blake's there because the CIA wants her in that position so they can take down. I mean, I can only assume, I could be wrong, but I don't think Tasha's going rogue doing this. I mean, her boss Keaton might be kind of going a little rogue, kind of doing this very, very off books, but I kind of feel like this isn't just like Tasha's play. I mean, once again, could be 100% wrong. No, not 100% Natasha that we know, but still we'll ultimately have to wait and see on that front. But I kind of feel like it's just kind of interesting because but you adapt to the situation. So it's kind of like, hey, I could be useful for you, which, she gives some suggestions about how they deal with the bodies and stuff like that. So Tasha kind of worms her way in. Still, I guess it keeps her closer to the organization. This way she can still keep her in. Plus she can also keep her life. So that is kind of interesting. I'm surprised that she was able to kind of keep that whole CIA thing very hush-hush. I mean, I guess like everyone in the FBI is the only one who... Well, no, because the previous head of the FBI, like she knew. So it must be like, well, she's kind of disemboweled by the CIA, so probably don't know that she's secretly working. But once again, that could be going back to the theory that like, oh yeah, she is super doing this off the books. But either way, and by that I mean like 100% on her own. Like this is 100% her own rogue operation. But then there's the whole situation of like, hey, White has taken over, and then like Madeline's like, oh, he can be malleable, which is interesting because he came down so hard on Tasha being potentially corrupt. Well, we know he's slimy. Like he goes about justice in his own way, but he is more so about beneficial stuff in his own work in his benefit. But at the same time, you're like, he holds some level of justice, but I guess you can see that he is malleable in the sense of him just kind of being a dick in general. So it's like, oh, we can use him, which is kind of like, man, can we not have someone at the top of that organization that isn't messed up in some sense? Like Mayfair was kind of the last person. Like, let's honestly say that Mayfair, yes, she had her issues she was trying to make up for, but she was the last good one. Obviously, eventually you had Reed and Kurt running things, but they don't count because they were kind of already, you get what I mean? Like, but everyone else has subsequently taken that position. It's like, I don't trust them. So, I'm curious to see if Hearst will ever come back in the story in any shape or form. Like I said, we'll see. But, yeah. And now, Madeline's also asking like, oh yeah, are you going to, what, if I ask you to, oh, that's your colleague, right? If I asked you to kill him, would you? And it's like, without hesitation. It's like, oh yeah, sure you are, because it's so interesting because from one, it's like Reed is already going through this whole situation of like, he hasn't, like Tasha's been going for a while. She's like, oh, I just need some time away. And obviously like she left one message because she knew, Reed constantly checking on her. Maybe that's the main reason why she suggested making herself disappear too. Because if she's doing this, she doesn't have to worry about Reed calling up. And if he calls up, he's going to be compromising their operation. So the question then becomes like, she said about faking their deaths. Granted, that was before like their deaths have been official. Like once it becomes official, then we'll probably see like the FBI learn about it, and then everyone got to break it down. Especially Patterson, because especially her and Tasha were not in a good place. They kind of got to a decent place, but they weren't where they were before. So that's probably going to be a big problem also for Reed too, especially where him and Tasha left off. So, but it's also to kind of protect the people that she cares about. But that's the thing, when it's all said and done, and when she goes down this route, they're not done with this whole like trying to take down his organization, Crawford's organization. So eventually going to cross paths and they find out that she's still alive. There probably won't be any forgiving her, but for her, maybe it's just kind of like, it's hard to say whether it's just kind of like, yeah, this is my job and I'm trying to do the greater good. Cause it's like, I don't know. Like, it's really hard to say like where Tasha has changed, but it's kind of hard to say. It doesn't seem like she's completely given up on her friends, but at the same time, it's like, did the like position of being with the CIA, like her time with them, spending her time with them, like seduce her into kind of like liking the way things are operated there, because she feels like she probably does more of the greater good. Yes, she has to compromise herself to a certain extent, but it's like, as with the CIA, you're doing more than you would be able to do with the FBI potentially, even though those are her friends. This is her family, this is her team. That comes, brings up the biggest question, so we'll ultimately have to wait and see on that front how things play out. You had Jane suggesting busting her mom out. I'm wondering, is that going to have what about Borden? Because, last time we saw he's locked up too. So, they're the only two people that are alive. Well, everyone else is either dead or in jail. So, But that's, like I said, that's going to be interesting when it's all said and done, especially because it's like, oh, I've got my Remy back. And it's like, it'll probably still be hard for her to accept because it's like, oh, yeah, like after everything you put me through, I tried to reach out to you so much. And now it's like, here you are and everything. So I'm curious, is there going to be a point where the stuff of the Jane stuff will eventually get to Remy? Once again, we'll probably have to wait and see, like, depending on if, like, Avery pops up in the story. I'm curious to see if that might end up changing her mind or not, her approach to all of this. Maybe it'll kind of fuel her even more to be like, no, when it's all said and done, I'm going to get my daughter away from all of this. I'll raise her under, like, this whole sandstorm situation. I don't know. We still have to wait and see on that front. There's a whole secret book thing of Romans that Rich is suggesting they do, but Patterson's like, no, just there's so much going on. The last thing they want to do is give any hope to Kurt, which is interesting because the whole phone call situation, because it's like, oh yeah, he's talking to someone. It turns out, oh no, that was just part of his hallucinations potentially. Was it someone from his past that he was still thinking was alive? Or like, what's up with that? It's also interesting because I was just thinking about this earlier, but I forgot to comment. What about Crawford's lawyer? Like, where is she in all of this? Like, is she just kind of out of the picture? After Crawford died, she probably just went dark, like took her cut and just disappeared. Maybe they arrested her. I don't know, but it's just kind of interesting that never circled back around. It's not like she was even working for Blake. It's just, I guess after Crawford died, she just bounced because it's like, oh yeah, everything's come toppling down potentially. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see her kind of popping up later on with a lot of the plans and stuff like that still in play. Then you have Kurt, who's being a little overbearing, which is kind of pissing Remy off more and more. Just the fact is that that's happening, and you know, obviously he's trying to get back into the field more so he can be there for Jane. That's definitely going to be an interesting thing because he's obviously kind of stuck on the sideline. Obviously he's being filled with a lot of the information, but eventually it's going to get to the point he's back on the field, which is going to give Jane even less wiggle room. Granted, she got, you know, him to kind of back down a little bit and not be so clingy. I did like that he caught her trying to watch the recordings of their wedding video because she's trying to capture like how Jane would act, you know. So like I said, it's such an interesting thing. Like I talked about this before in a video recently about how like I was actually surprised that this storyline is happening now because I kind of would have expected it to happen sooner. Because remember, Jane had those nightmares early on about like Remy coming to kind of ruin everything. It's like, oh, here I have Roman and I have Kurt. It's like everything is great, and then Remy showed up and ruined everything, which I guess that was like heavy foreshadowing in that sense. But still, I was kind of expecting that to potentially come up sooner than it did. But nevertheless, like I said, this season premiere just hit it on all cylinders because there's like so much it's set up, and I'm so excited to see what they end up ultimately doing, like how this season ends up playing out. The subterfuge is higher than it's ever been before on a different level because like we've never had it be like this since season 1. Like obviously Jane played it up in season 2 because she was pretending to be back with Sandstone for a tiny bit, but that didn't work for too long and everything. So now it becomes that situation. It's actually kind of it's kind of how it's interesting when you break it down thinking season wise, because it flipped back and forth because season 1 she was undercover, you know, still secretly working for Sandstorm, trying to be the good guy, but then she switched to being a good guy, still playing bad to a certain extent, but then she stayed a good guy. In season 2, she was a good guy playing bad, but she stayed good. And now, like, this is kind of reverse of that, where she's actually the bad guy pretending to be good. It's just kind of interesting how that kind of all works in the storyline. So, especially because there's even more heat on her now because it's like, oh yeah, they all know that there is the person that tried to contact Dolan. So it's like, we got to find that person because they're the last piece to this whole Sandstorm situation. And I did like what they did aesthetically, where it's like, oh, we had this like silhouette of who it could be, and you just happen to see Jane looking down and her reflection is over the silhouette. I was like, oh, that's little details like that is pretty nice. So like I said, I am so excited to see what the next episode has in store for us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.